Welcome to Ncast, the podcast from NOps. Each week, we'll explore the world of cloud cost management, the latest in AWS optimization, and getting practical about your FinOps journey. Join us as we dive deep into the latest trends, tools, and best practices, while having conversations with leaders and luminaries who are innovating on the front lines. Our goal is to provide value to the community through insights and practical advice that will help you to achieve your FinOps goals. So whether you're in engineering, leadership, finance, or a cloud professional, this is the place for you. Sit back, relax, and get ready to join the conversation on Ncast. Everybody, and welcome to this episode of Ncast, the podcast about all things cloud cost optimization, FinOps, and a lot of really cool tech. I'm excited today. I've got some great conversationalists here with me. So we've got Giri, the CEO of NOps, and I've got Andrew Lewis, our principal cloud optimization architect. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hey guys, so I'm Giri. I'm the CEO of NOps, and really looking forward to today's conversation. My background has been in cloud ecosystem for last decade. I was migrating companies to AWS when EC2 was in beta. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Hey, I was on last episode, but I'm Andrew Lewis. I work in NOps as a cloud optimization architect. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, and I'm excited to talk about commitment issues today.
Yeah, commitment issues. Why do engineers have such a hard time committing? It's complicated, isn't it? What do you think, guys?
I mean, engineers are good at building stuff, right? And innovating and solving problems. Maybe not so much learning AWS pricing plans, right? And I don't know if they should be,
Should they? Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I think maybe that's probably the reason,
And maybe also they get burned by commitments. Andrew, do you have any personal experience with that?
Yeah, I was good. I was about to launch into that.
Yeah.
I like saving money. I find that fun as an engineer. But at the same time, whenever I saw us by our eyes, I always saw it as like a failing. Like we had, it was like the easy way out. So I can definitely understand the hesitation around that. I've also been, kind of downstream from centralized FinOps teams and not knowing what they're, optimizing for all the time, because and working on optimizing things for maybe a new instance type and not knowing that they are ready to buy a bunch of old one or a bunch of the current generation we were using. That lack of communication has been, made me kind of anxious to ever buy RIs sometimes because, I feel like I'm making a big commitment for not only for the first year, but often the biggest savings are that 3-year mark. And that's always, I have no idea what's going to happen in 3 years. So it's, that always felt wrong.
Yeah, the process is kind of strange, right, Andrew? So you have like a CFO or whoever up top trying to reduce cloud cost, and then they grab like VP of engineer and say, hey, we need to reduce our costs. And then they're paying someone from engineering team like, hey, go
DevOps team. It's the DevOps team. Yeah.
And a person is like in the middle of thousands of things and literally have to carve out like a couple hours and, just to kind of make that commitment. But, as we'll probably dive into this conversation, it's not easy. There's the order of how savings plan, reserve instances, all these things get applied, and you make a commitment. You're kind of committing to yesterday's tech essentially.
And I would say,
go ahead.
I would say it's not quite hours. It's usually would be months of my time that all of a sudden I'm derailed and doing something else to try to chase something. And you can have big wins. Sometimes the best way to save money is turning things off, which NOps has a product to do that for you.
True.
But also, just you'd have to spend a lot of time collecting data. Sometimes it would be penny wise and how foolish you'd be chasing little things instead of big things. And so it's the whole topic is fraught. But let's get to commitment issues today.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, Andrew. So the CFO comes down and the mandate is cut your costs 10%, 20%. What tools do you have at your disposal to even know how the way that the commitments are organized? So it's done by instance family, right? So yeah, R5, R6, the go down the list. There could be a lot of different services that are using the same types of instances. And if you go to Cost Explorer, even with best tagging, it's almost impossible to decipher and to truly allocate those costs. So really isn't that the first step of the journey, getting in and doing proper show acts so that you even understand like who's using it, right?
Yeah, I think that's the step a lot of people miss. Like you have to establish the baseline first, right? The whole idea of cloud is like you only use resources when you need them. And cloud environment is like so complex. Most of the time, it's just kind of hard to know like what exactly are you running? Do you need all those resources? Then you have shared costs across different teams. Like, we talk to customers all the time, and when they start allocating costs, there's like servers that are named Dev 1, Dev 4, Dev 6, Test 1, Test 2, Test 3, right? But then and then people forget about it, right? So the baseline before you make any commitments, right? Let's go on a date. Let's stick with that theme, right? Like the date part is let's track. Let's see where are we spending money, like and then once you have a good sort of foundation, then you can actually maybe look into making the commitments.
Right. So no, teams are under pressure. I've been under this pressure in smaller organizations where budgets are tight, and then you get acquired by a big organization and you realize that they have a process around this, but it's still at the end of the day just cut the budget. So you try to get into cost allocation, and then your engineers come back and tell you it's going to take us 6 months to properly tag all of these resources. Executive leadership is not going to wait 6 months for results, right? Oh, we'll fix it in a year. Well, you've already spent an additional $100, $200, $300,000 by that time, right?
And I would also say at that point, tagging all your resources is important, but you have to be careful. You can't count the amount of times that I got dinged for something I didn't control that was untagged, and it was a $4 a month S3 bill. And the tagging that is, who knows where it came from. You had to be tactical about, understanding, knowing where the limits are, I guess I would, from my personal experience, because chasing down that $4, I put the tag on it, but whenever we were going to turn that bucket off and show back, or the time you have to spend, even if we did it would be in years about an engineering client we did to try to figure some of these out. So, it's more than just, I would say it's more than just tagging. Tagging is very, don't get me wrong, it's incredibly important. It's
right.
Being able, having something like a showback mechanism is, I think it's, even if that's like, tag is important and it kind of gets you where you want Cost Explorer, but it doesn't really necessarily tell you anything in Cost Explorer. So being able to use existing tags to drive showbacks is a huge deal. And that's what a lot of tools do, but that's what we do as well.
Yeah, that's why I'm really proud of business contexts. I mean, JT, how easy is it? I spend so much time in that tool.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, we have hundreds of customers that literally probably in my career probably spoke with hundreds of customers. I've never met anyone who has their tagging nailed down. I've yet to meet a company where they're like, we have conquered this thing,
Right.
And because it's an ongoing thing, like Andrew said, it's just there's so many teams. Some teams might call their environment prod, some might call it production, right? So there's so many variances on how people kind of look at their environment. So just like I do see like, this one of those projects, like, hey, we need to make sure, tagging is 100%. And those projects could be like months long, but I don't know what's the ROI at the end, right? What you really need is ability to like slice and dice the data by your business context, right? Like you should be able to layer your business view on top of your AWS spend. Tagging is one mechanism. It could be by account. It could be by usage type. Hell, it could be by like, like our Databricks bill is like, that's where we store everything, right? Like, so you have marketplace subscription. How do you allocate that to, cost of goods sold or to R&D, right? So it's just a very complex problem. That's why, like, if you try to do some of this stuff like cost allocation and showbacks, distributing shared costs with like a cost explorer or any other tools, it's incredibly hard, right? But once you do that, it's amazing. It's amazing,
Right. And watch out. You can't rely on your service charges, right? I got charged X dollars for compute. Well, okay, I'll go commit to that and compute. How much of that is network, right? How much of those charges are actually not going to get hit by that savings plan or that RI? And unless you have the ability to look at it with that level of resolution, subtract out the network, and then put that into a different bucket, because there's a whole other cost optimization topic that we'll get into someday, is like, what the heck do I do with all those network charges, right?
Right.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
I think we've made our point. Cost out, you have to start with step one, which is figure out.
Understand every dollar. Yeah. Understand every dollar of your AWS spend. Like, how does that align with different projects? How do you distribute that across different business units and, different teams? That's the starting point, like I don't think companies should make any commitments before you have that understanding.
And what you see is companies kind of get in the hole, and they're like, oh no, we're bleeding money, and there's like a rush of commitments made. And we're going to get more into what commitments mean, I guess, in a minute, but there's rush of commitments made because we're bleeding, you're hemorrhaging money and you can't go on, and your CFO's yelling. And the other thing that CFO wants is they want a steady bill. They like the data center.
Predictability.
Predictability that is incredibly hard in Amazon, because it is elastic and it is more expensive. And in some ways, line for line, if you compare the data center to Amazon, it's more expensive. Now, we've all bought into the cloud native, and it gives us that there's a whole class of problems we don't need to solve anymore. But for, a CFO who doesn't, he just sees a line on he sees a charge. He's like, oh man, this is super expensive. It's not variable, and it's really hard for me to account for. And I've been in every organization I've ever worked in. That's been one of the biggest complaints from finance, is that, we're hemorrhaging money. I can't predict it. We need to put cost controls in, and that's the start of the cost journey. Is let's buy a bunch of RIs, let's buy a bunch of savings plans.
And spoiler, there's an easy button. So, risk-free commitment, right? I mean, I hate to brag about NOps, but we can take care of that while you're starting that journey, right? Like there are solutions out there. But let's still talk about, like, why is it so complicated? So now I've got cost allocation done, right? I understand where every penny goes. Do I understand a landscape of commitment tools and savings vehicles out there? What's next? Do I just commit?
I think you do a little bit of Googling. So I'm pretty sure Andrew probably has a lot of experience there, but you have to understand, obviously there's different types of commitments available, right? There's savings plan, and there's reserve instances, there are convertibles, there are standard, there are compute savings plan, and
flexible, inflexible. Yeah, it just goes on, right?
And the bigger the risk you take, the better discounts you get. So like if you make 3-year commitments, you're like kind of committing to that for 3 years. So the discount will be higher, but you're committing to that compute or instance type for next 3 years, which is like, I don't know, in cloud, the way that, how fast cloud moves, anytime you make any commitments, the way I look at it, you're committing to yesterday's tech. So
Right.
you're really making a bet on that technology for next 3 years on that instance type. So yeah, that's why it's like, it gets kind of complicated. Andrew could probably share some real world example. He probably,
I mean,
I was like,
that's 3 years, 3 year commitment. Yeah, you can save too much money, but that's 3 years of reinvents. And that presumes that they don't do it in mid-cycle refresh. So are you, in today's terms, are you running down M3s, or M4s? Are you committing that for 3 years? And, we're already on, we're, only on Graviton. We're on the 7th generation, where Graviton came out of nowhere for workloads that you can move to Graviton. Okay, now, now that ARM exists, that didn't exist 3 years ago. He didn't think Amazon was going to offer that as a real solution. And even past that, like look at, let's not talk about it. Let's talk about RDS. Okay, I've committed to RDS. I'm always gonna have a Postgres database for the next 3 years. Well, now they have ARM-based RDS instances, and that's an even easier conversion because you don't need to think about it. There's nothing. You don't need to rewrite your code. You don't need to do anything. Aurora's come out. Serverless has come out.
Right.
And, you can hedge your bets, the other options, you can hedge your bet with 3 year, general savings plan, but that's still a huge commitment. You don't know what your spend's going to, are you going to be in a situation where you can re-architect something significant and realize a lot of savings, or something, maybe you move to a managed technology all of a sudden that that isn't covered.
That's a great point, Andrew. Like, how many people are not upgrading their RDS right now, even though it's like one-click upgrade, because of the commitments?
Because of the commitments. Well, and I know we always do things perfectly at NOps, but hey, we've made those decisions ourselves. Look at our OpenSearch bill. It's not cheap, but you almost feel like the pressure to say the savings is so much greater. All right, and I commit to this. Well, lo and behold, we're a Databricks shop today, right?
Yeah.
So
who would have thought, right? Like,
who would have
you make those commitments? Yeah, when you made those commitments, you're like, right, we'll have OpenSearch for another year. But it turns out maybe we don't need it.
Maybe we don't. Turns out Druid is like 1,000 times faster and more scalable, right? And cheaper. So
I looked at using OpenSearch for logging at my last company, and we kind of have a decision moment where we're like, are we going to commit to this? And we were having to make that decision very early in the process, because we had to make that decision because we wanted to commit for a year or 2 or 3, because okay, if we move to OpenSearch, it's going to cost us this much money. So we either had to decide to burn a bunch of money, and we ended up not using it. We decided, actually, this is way more effort than we want to work, and we'll just shovel money in our vendors, because this isn't core to our business. So why are we trying to solve this problem? And so if we had made the decision, would we have backed ourselves in the corner and you could have something we didn't use, or would we? It feels very weird for the power of the cloud for me to say I'm going to be doing this thing for 1 to 3 years. That's it. And then you look, well, okay, I only do it for a year. Savings aren't that great. You think the standard savings plan, I think it's what, 20, some mid-20s percentage on just a straight savings plan. You think about the 1 year RI coverage, it's about 20 something percent, which is good. I mean, I like 20% off. If you ask me, if I went to the store, I would love to have 20% off. But then you kind of look over, it's like, oh, the 3 years is 50% off or something, something 60% off. And it's like you said, okay, am I willing to commit to this for this long? And maybe if I bought it day one of something I thought I was going to use for the next 3 years, it'd be the best business decision optimization decision I made. But you can't even sit, you think about the new, Amazon's released at least 2, they're on the 3rd generation of ARM. So if that, you can't even, you don't know what that's. Anyway, we could probably talk about that.
And I mean, speaking of commitment, and just to use an analogy, it's like you're going on your first date and you're already popping the question, right? It's like and it costs as much as a big diamond ring. So It's very hard. So it's very hard to make these decisions as you're building a roadmap and experimenting with new technologies and delivering innovation. We've all been there. It's a juggling act. So the landscape's complicated, but just to make it more complicated, as you get into an organization of any size, right? You're making these decisions, and I've been in mega corporation organizations. You're making decisions, but this whole thing is centralized. So commitments actually apply at the organization level. So there's this whole other layer of complication where your decision to increase a workload, your decision to make a commitment, you may have zero visibility into what some team that's in an entirely different geo or working on an entirely different product line is making, and that there's conflict, right? So as you scale, the problem doesn't get any easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the moral of the story is like, honestly, like before you make any commitments, I will explore tool like NOps where we adjust your commitments up and down based on your workload. I mean, that's how cloud was intended. Even if you have existing commitments, we overlay our technology on top of yours. But I would highly encourage folks to just find a solution to kind of manage this automatically, use machine learning and AI, kind of like what we do. Well, it's hard to do this on spreadsheets,
Still, well, as somebody has said that it's like a cortisone shot, right? You're under pressure from finance, and FinOps is a journey, right? It's a crawl, walk, run journey. And so how do you stop the hemorrhaging and how do you start making advances while you're starting to get your inform phase done? And then beyond commitments, commitments, that means I pay less. We all know that the use less lever is really the promise of the cloud. We were promised a consumption-based model. We were promised elasticity. And what we know is that teams are really good at spinning things up, not so good at spinning them down, right? So,
or even the cycles interrupts to re-architect. Like, do you have enough time to interrupt a team I'm in a lot of conversations where it's like, we want to deliver this product feature and we don't want to spend, 2 months or a month re-architecting how we use this database technology or how this is architected. Even though we think we could get it cheaper, because it's just not valuable to the business. It's more valuable,
right.
To go into
or the opposite is happening, which is you're making decisions about keeping things alive. JT mentioned it, but think about this. My competitor just came out with a great new feature, and I got to adopt a new technology to keep up, to surpass. You're sacrificing going after the things that are meaningful just to keep your cloud spend or the commitments that you have in place. And that's not how innovation works, right? We need to free the engineering team from the shackles of all this complexity so that they can focus on making great things, right?
Or even the FinOps team. Like the FinOps team probably has better things to do than move levers on the amount of RIs they have over the course of the day.
Well, we know people like that, right? We work with customers every day. And if you're that person, right, we're talking basics here. We'll get into advanced things. If you're the person that's like, yeah, I already know all of this. I'm an expert in this. We hear you, but would you not rather spend your time on higher value things and let automation do what take care of what it can?
Right. So let's maybe talk about, like, once you make these perfect commitments, if there was such a thing, what are some of the challenges after? What happens? Like, what are some challenges after you make the commitments?
Who wants to go first, Andrew?
To be honest, I have been saving money with spot and commitments for years, and there's things I learn about them every day. or not every day, everything's that I learn about them not constantly are new nuances and stuff like that. So even to even say you could make the perfect commitment would be like, I would be hard pressed to make, like my best case as an individual would be, I'd try to make a pretty good commitment and go from there. Just because, like not savings plans, how do they burn down? What is the, one of the nuances is that savings plans will take your if you have a negotiated discounted rate with Amazon, it will take your discounted rate with Amazon into account. So that makes it just that much harder for you to predict what your actual utilization, right? Your utilization is. I'm not sure if we talked about it here, but like you can't just look at your compute spend because your networking spend is involved. And I think we said there was things you can do with tricks you can do with your networking spend, but your transit gateway spend. So there's a lot of like Amazon best practicey native things that cost you a lot of money. And I'm not even going to get into the one that the one that everybody talks about the most is NAT gateways, but just how load balancers you just deployed, how people think about NAT gateways, not NAT gateways, transit gateways. There's a lot of like in that we're not going to get into it now in the networking side. But there's all of that comes under your compute spend, and RAs don't touch any part of it. Savings plans don't touch any part of that. So
how about how they hate your bill? Right. So
yes.
So our RIs are not amortized when you see them in your bill, and so it takes advanced technology to even figure out like what computer did that thing get applied to.
Right.
And then you have to, let's talk variable workloads, right? So, you make your commitment, you think you did it perfect. You even went in and said, okay, I'm only committing to my actual box usage. But did you take into account that these things are burned down by the hour? You have a bucket every hour, right? So if you missed that train because your auto scaling group scaled way down at 1 o'clock, but then at 3 o'clock it's running at 100 nodes or 150 nodes. You're overutilized in 1 hour. You're underutilized in another hour.
But you lost money in that hour when you were unused, right?
You lost it. It's gone. Yeah. You spent it. It's gone.
Right. There's no rollover, right? Pretty much.
Or you spend on spot. Yeah. That's big when we see somebody, it's converted spot. It's cool. Well, in US East this week, C instances were almost on-demand prices. So if you had switched to on-demand or spot, you were paying on-demand prices. And if you were missing your savings plans, you were like double paying because you were.
So you lost money on spot, right? Oh, right. And there's a lot of ways to do that, right? Spot sounds great, but let's keep in mind that just because you're using the same instance family on spot does not mean that it applies to any of your commitments.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a completely new bucket.
Right. That's probably one of the most frequently asked questions as we onboard them to NOps. First of all, like it seems like there's no easy way in AWS to see like an amortized cost. And then secondly, people just want to know what is covered by my existing savings plan and RIs. There's no easy way to do that, right? In NLOps, because we ingest data, we do billing for pretty much living, process billions of dollars of AWS spend. We have that expertise and we make it easy for you to do that in the platform. But yeah, I feel like it's a big mystery after you make the purchase, but in some cases, and we just mentioned, you think you're doing the right thing, but not really, and you're actually overpaying,
Right. Yeah. And Amazon has tried to make it, they say they've made it easier, but now there's quite as many options. They have different things, it's just incredibly hard.
Well, it's complicated for them too, right? We're all in on AWS, that's for sure. But the fact of the matter is that, they've got enterprises on all different types and varieties of savings tools, and some work in some situations and some work in other situations, but it makes it complex, especially for the small to medium, the startups, and then at scale, you just hit a whole different set of problems. You may have gotten it down with your group, but now you're playing with every other group. So here's another interesting area of conversation, which is, we talk a lot about EC2 or RDS, but we all know that workloads and a growing percentage of EC2 spend is managed by container orchestration. If we may think everything runs on EKS right now, it's not true. There are still plenty of workloads that they're on that journey, but EKS accounts for a huge component of it. Andrew, you're an EKS guru, so why does it get even harder with these like uber dynamic, scalable, auto scaling, VPA, HPA? Like, there's a lot of other moving parts there, right?
Yeah, we kind of got into it a little bit last week. So about like some of the cost optimization strategies, but I think at the heart of it is when Kubernetes came out, there was a really strong mapping to something called node groups, a node between node groups and auto scaling groups, because that was like the cloud native answer. Like the Amazon, every cloud had a version of that. And to tease at it a little bit, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, in depth. And I know we're going to have a talk with the folks behind it. There's new ideas coming on board, and new ideas kind of across the board. There's the majority of a lot of compute spend we see internally is going into EKS. That's a huge growth, part of the growth of the EC2 market. And you have some people branching off into serverless and fully managed solutions, and things like behind API gateway and stuff like that. And you have some people that are still in ECS, love ECS. I come from an EKS background. ECS, I've used ECS. I prefer EKS, but that's a semantical debate. I don't think there's anything. You choose one over the other. It's not the end of the world. But you're talking about like we're getting away from that like auto scaling group idea. If you think about things like Fargate, we're trying to more fit the workload. What is happening, I think, in a lot of these systems, particularly in EKS, that the workloads inside these environments are not the node anymore. So it's very hard. You can't do, I was at a conversation earlier, and I was kind of explaining to some folks what Carpenter was. And it's very hard to deal with. So in the old days, you just scaled up on CPU. You had an auto scaling group. They all ran they all set of code. You sailed on CPU, or some metric got hit, you scaled because you kind of knew those metrics. But now you have this like internal construct that's pod. It's not the same across every instance. You have internal things like HPA, which scales pods out. And I think it took me a little bit to actually wrap my head around this. Man, I've got all this stuff. I've been used to dealing with auto scaling groups for, almost 10 years at this point. I'm very aware of what they do and don't do. But it was almost, once I got it, once the epiphany hit, it was, I'm matching my workloads inside Kubernetes. And that's kind of been one of the struggles. If you look at early EKS, there was a lot of consternation from Amazon. It's like, well, we have ECS, it understands your workloads already. And I think I think Carpenter is kind of like one of the great evolutions of that, understanding that problem is that we don't necessarily know like the end all be all about a workload from the outside. Kubernetes has to drive this conversation. So that's what Carpenter is. And
so the net here, let me play back. So now the community, that the EKS experts, optimization experts, what we've determined is that the best way to schedule workloads is not to pin them to an instance type, but to get to understand the correct dimensions for the exact set of services that need to be scheduled at any point. And the most optimal way to run is to pick the right dimension node to schedule those things on, which, by the way, could be across instance families. It could be compute optimized. It could be memory optimized. So now, how do you make a commitment when the most optimal way to run your workload is to pick it might not be the commitments you made, right? The most optimal way might not be the commitment you already made, right?
Or has no context about your commitments. And you could kind of like, you give it guardrails. Obviously, you don't want to run on like if you have something that needs a lot of resources for some reason or has some special things, you don't want to run it maybe on a really small old instance, for example. But you can give it, and with this new Carpenter, particularly, you can give it guardrails. Hey, I want at least this many CPUs up to this max. I want newer generations, at least this generation or above. And this is particularly important. Carpenter will do on demand all day, every day, and that does help you. That does help you save money because you don't have. There are some things with cluster autoscaler that doesn't do well. I'm sure we'll get into that next week. As compared to cluster autoscaler doesn't do well. That Carpenter kind of very neatly solves a lot of these problems. But it even, especially with the spot market, you don't know where that market's going to be at any given time. I kind of said it earlier. People were buying C5As all week. They would say, "Oh, I'm only going to buy C5X 8 largest." You're saving 4% off the on-demand price. Now, there's some AZs where you're saving 17%, and then Carpenter can figure that out for you. But that's
it's a little myopic, isn't it? So here's what we talked about. How AWS billing happens, and it happens at the organization level, and savings plans are applied, and RIs are applied across an entire organization. And as advanced as your organization is, it doesn't all live in one Kubernetes cluster, right? It doesn't live in one EKS. And so Carpenter, yes, but how does Carpenter know everything else that's going on in your environment? Or even what's going on in another cluster, right?
Right.
It's a problem, right?
The only thing it knows is whether or not it can ask for and gets a response from the Amazon API if something's available and cheapest price first.
And is it cheap? Yeah.
Right. And it even is it cheap? Have you narrowed your guardrails so tight that it's picking the cheapest instance, but you're still paying an outrageous price for it?
Right. Or you went too far and said, do all spot, and I forgot about on demand, or I forgot about my RIs.
Right.
It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation, right?
I guess we just have to have it is really, really complicated. So building this intelligence into your organization.
Well, you know what I think we should do? I think we should get the Carpenter team on here and let's talk about it. And, all right, spoiler alert, that's our exciting news, right? We're going to have the Carpenter team on next week, and we're going to talk about some really cool stuff. We're going to get into it, and, we're going to talk about supercharging Carpenter and playing on some different strengths. So I'm not going to give too much away, but we're going to get into it. Hey guys, we could talk all day long about this stuff. And if you're still listening out there, I can't believe it. You're as nerdy as we are about this stuff, but as you can tell, we love it. We hope you tune in next week when we have the Carpenter team on, and we're going to have another really interesting conversation. Thanks, JT. Thanks, Andrew, for taking the time to jump in here today. We're going to have a lot more. We're going to hear a lot more from both of you.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks, man. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll always enjoy it. Okay, that's it for this Endcast. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Endcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode. As you can tell, we love to geek out on all things cloud optimization. If you have any questions or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram, or just shoot us an email at ncast@nops.io. If you'd like to learn more about the continuing innovation over at NOps, or about our free FinOps platform where you never pay anything unless you save money, check us out over at www.nops.io.